Hello. So my case is on a 22-year-old Latina woman. She comes into session or into therapy at the request of her parents. Parents request that the therapist help the client leave her boyfriend. Client shares boyfriend of 6 months. Um, client shares that she's been with her boyfriend for 6 months and he has beat her a couple times. Client discloses she refused to leave him because she loves him. Client has two young children at home who have witnessed the abuse, and the therapist has a past history of being a victim of interpersonal violence and begins to feel triggered when hearing the client's story. So, to start off, based on my legal and ethical duty, I would go over informed consent with my client to explain any questions she may have on the form, and would have her read and sign a physical copy, as well as also get her verbal agreement. An ethical issue that I'm considering is that my client is a 22-year-old. So technically, she does not necessarily need her parents' permission for or approval for therapy. I would still consider, of course, with my client's approval and permission, to keep parents involved based on cultural considerations and values. My client is Latina, and it is important to keep culture involved if it will benefit her. So, for example, familismo is a huge part of the Latinx culture. So, I would consider having a session with parents. However, if the client is not okay with parents being involved, I would respect her decision to keep them out of the session. So, I would then, based on my ethical duty, disclose limits of confidentiality to my client, and review circumstances where confidentiality would have to be broken. And I would also remind her of these limits throughout sessions, as maybe a conversation starts to get a little like shifted towards her saying something that I would have to report. I would tell her, I would remind her of my duty. Because my client disclosed that there are children in the home who have witnessed her physical abuse by her boyfriend, I now have a legal duty as a mandated reporter to call the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS, to report that my client's children have witnessed the physical abuse in the home. Um, so I would also consider, based on my ethical duty, my scope of competence, and would not advise my client to leave her boyfriend, even though this is something that her parents wanted the therapist to do for her daughter, um, regardless of the situation. So, however, um, regardless of the situation, I would not advise. However, I would assess the physical abuse further with my client to learn more of when the abuse happened. If the abuse is based on client's boyfriend um, having the intentions to hurt her permanently, and assess my client's feelings towards the abuse, and whether or not she wants to leave him. Based on my client's decision, I would create a safety plan with her on who she would reach out to if she needed to leave him. We would create a support system contact list, a safe place for her to go. This could be a family member's home that her boyfriend doesn't know about, or a home for women who have been victims of abuse. Um, I can also assess whether the client would like the parents to be involved in helping her leave the situation. Um, Based on my legal duty, I would stay within my scope of practice to service my client based on my licensed marriage and family therapy education, and not based on my experience with past history on interpersonal abuse. Um, or violence, sorry. I would make sure when servicing my client that I do not get other experience out of my practice into session, which would affect my client. This issue can arise, the issues that can arise from this is that if I aid my client based on a non-practice experience, if the client ends up getting hurt in the process, this can potentially be a legal issue against me. In order to stop that from happening, I would work through my own things with my therapist and would stop myself from saying anything out of my scope of practice. Based on this, I also have an ethical responsibility to my client to service her to the best of my ability and not abandon her. This is based on my own previous history with being a victim of interpersonal violence. I would take the ethical necessary steps to deal with my countertransference with my own therapist outside of session with my client. And this would be like the first step I would take. If based on continuing therapy with my client, I realize that I'm still having countertransference, I would make the ethical decision to provide my client with resources, which possibly um, can include referring my client out to another therapist. This would once again be my last resort after trying to continue to see my client and working on my own history with my own therapist. Um, of course, as sessions progress, I would further assess my own bias towards this case and my client. And as I mentioned, I would make the necessary decisions that could benefit my client. Um, I would also, throughout sessions, make sure I keep assessing, when possible, my client's decision to leave or stay with her boyfriend. And that's it.